What's up, basketball fans? Welcome to the Warriors Report. It's time to talk about potential trade talks because there are some names that have been linked to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Gary Trent Jr., Harrison Barnes, and Malik Beasley are being linked as viable trade options for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, anyone who may not follow this channel, this is a Raptors channel, so I'm going to be breaking down this trade talk between the Raptors and the Cleveland Cavaliers as well. Now, this was being reported, as you see in this article, by Evan Dammarell. So Evan's been reporting this again. We get these news outlets breaking, potential trade rumors or certain players being linked to different teams. But we do have to know, before we dismiss these rumors completely, we do have to talk about Masai Ujiri, because at the end of the season, after the playoffs, he held a press conference and he talked about the Raptors core. He talked about essentially a lot of players, but one name he did not mention during that conference was Gary Trent Jr. Now, am I suggesting those rumors are completely 100% true, where the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Raptors could make a deal for Gary Trent Jr.? Maybe not, but it's always exciting to talk about this, especially in the offseason where news talk is a little bit slow. So for today's video, I'm going to be talking about some hypothetical trade scenarios which could send Gary Trent Jr. to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and if the Raptors were ever to trade him there, what they could potentially look to acquire back. So if you're ready to watch this video, guys, make sure to hit the like button. Let's get this video out to a lot more to basketball fans like yourself. If you want to hit the subscribe button as well, that would be very much appreciated. So with that being said, let's get into today's video. Now, as you guys know, I do like to give out shout outs on my channel, and for today's video, the shout out goes out to Sher Khan. So Sher Khan, thank you so much for supporting this channel, to the likes and comments. And let's talk about Gary Trent Jr. first, just to kind of give you an highlight for those who may not be Raptors fans and don't really know a lot about Gary Trent Jr. Gary Trent Jr., very young player, 23 years old, listed at 6'5", 209 pounds. He had a really good season with the Raptors in which he produced 18.3 points, 2.7 rebounds, 2 assists, but the most important part is his shooting. He shot an amazing 38.3% from the three, and he's also a good free throw shooter as well. As you see there, 85.3%. But when we talk about Gary Trent Jr., and again, if the Raptors do look to move on from Gary Trent Jr., it's important to talk about his contract. He is making about $17.2 million next season. He does have a player option after that, which he will undoubtedly decline to look for a longer contract and also a higher pay as well. Now, when we talk about potentially Gary Trent Jr. to the Cleveland Cavaliers, we do have to take a look at the Cavaliers salary cap situation as well. Now, Gary Trent Jr. is making 17.2. I know people are going to point to Caris LeVert right away. I'm going to dismiss any sort of talk about that. That's not happening. The Raptors are not taking a 27-year-old injury-prone Caris LeVert for Gary Trent Jr. just because Gary Trent is much younger. He has a lot more potential, and just Caris LeVert is injury prone again for that reason. But when you talk about some of these other players as well, obviously Jarrett Allen stands out, Cedi Osman, and I want to talk about some of these players because when we talk about Jarrett Allen, he's making $20 million a year. The Raptors are in a need of a center, but let's talk about these rumors first of all. I don't see the Cleveland Cavaliers moving on from Jarrett Allen simply because once Jarrett Allen went down with that injury we saw, the Cleveland Cavaliers went from being third ranked in the league defensively to being ranked at the bottom of the league. I believe it was 27th in the league without Jarrett Allen. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Cleveland Cavaliers to move Jarrett Allen, and even the Raptors, although I love Jarrett Allen and what he brings to the team in terms of, what he would bring to the Raptors, their defensive big that they really need. He's also great at rebounding. He's also great at blocking shots as well. And look at that win share. That's amazing for someone, for a center. 8.5 wins to the team would be amazing. And he's young as well. He's only 24 years old, and $20 million honestly isn't a lot considering when you got guys like DeAndre Ayton who won a max contract, and of course you got Rudy Gobert who's making $40 million next season. So Jarrett Allen wouldn't be bad for a Gary Trent Jr. trade. But again, the scenario, again, I'm not saying I wouldn't say no to a Gary Trent for Jarrett Allen trade. First of all, the Cleveland Cavaliers, I don't see them doing it. And then when you take a look at it from the Raptors' point of view, you're losing a lot of offense. You're losing one of your best shooters. And for a team that struggles to produce points, I don't know, again, guys, I'm not saying, again, I wouldn't say no to Jarrett Allen, but that is a tough situation to be in because the Raptors lose a lot of offense, and their half-court offense already struggles. So let's talk about some other players. Now, Isaac Okoro, he's making about $17 million. For those who may not be familiar, Isaac Okoro came into this league very similar to how OG Anunoby did, a very great defensive player, not really known for his offense. And as you take a look at his age, he fits in with the timeline well. 21 years old, 6'5", 225 pounds. He's a lot better defensively than Gary Trent Jr., but again, he is not producing nearly as much offensively. He's not giving you much. In fact, he's not giving you anything close. He is a good three-point shooter as well. and he is younger. But again, the Raptors are, I wouldn't say they're in a win now mode, but they do need players that can impact right away, not 2, 3, 4, or 5 years from now. So I don't know if they would trade for Isaac Okoro and Cedi Osman. They'd have to throw in for salary purposes as well when you talk about matching Gary Trent Jr.'s salary. And he's, again, Cedi Osman is a decent bench player, but I don't see how this trade for the Raptors would make sense, trading for Isaac and Cedi Osman for Gary Trent Jr. Gary Trent Jr. is a proven scorer. So again, it's very unlikely a trade does happen, but just speaking hypotheticals and what players could be moved. Now, obviously, this is a player. Collin Sexton is a very interesting player because obviously the Cleveland Cavaliers played a lot better without Collin Sexton. Darius Garland was just shining without him in the lineup, and Collin Sexton did have a season-ending injury, but he is a restricted free agent the Cleveland Cavaliers potentially want to move on from. He's 23 years old, and if I'm the Raptors management, I'm looking at this. Do I really want someone who is 6'1", 190 pounds? Because we have Fred VanVleet, who's listed at 6 feet. So now you're adding someone just almost as short as Fred VanVleet, who is a score-first guard like Fred VanVleet. And again, you lose a little bit of height there for a team that's been going with the 6'8", 6'9" mobile, switchable players. It doesn't make a lot of sense for the Raptors. Again, I'm not saying Collin Sexton wouldn't be a good player on the Raptors, but looking at the Raptors backcourt, it would be Fred VanVleet, 6 foot, Collin Sexton as shooting guard at 6'1", and again, you're going to have to pay Collin Sexton a decent amount as well. Now, he is a pretty good player. His statistics this season weren't all that great in terms of his three-point percentage, and overall, he obviously had a little bit of a struggle. But when you talk about Collin Sexton, he is someone who can get his baskets, but there's been questions about him as a teammate as well. He plays selfishly at times. He looks for his own stats. Again, I just realistically, being honest, I don't see why the Raptors would want to trade Gary Trent Jr. to the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team very similar to the Raptors that is up and coming, that's got a bright future. And just in terms of like some of the assets that the Cleveland Cavaliers have, they obviously have Darius Garland, Evan Mobley. They're not moving those two guys for Gary Trent Jr. Obviously, that's not happening, but there just seems like there wouldn't be a trade happening between those two teams. I mean, Gary Trent Jr. would be great on the Cleveland Cavaliers. If you're a Cavs fan, absolutely. But why would the Raptors get rid of him? I think the Raptors, if they were ever to move Gary Trent Jr., which I don't think is a far-stretched idea, and I think they may just move him in the future, I think they would probably like to move him for a shooting guard that is able to get his own baskets, and he's an immediate bucket getter. So again, I think potentially Gary Trent in the future could be moved for a bigger package. So we'll leave that up to Masai Ujiri and the management to see what happens with Gary Trent Jr. But I do want to hear from you guys. What do you think of these rumors? What do you think of the Raptors potentially moving on from Gary Trent Jr.? Do you think Masai Ujiri not mentioning Gary Trent Jr. at the end of the season press conference is an indication of anything in the future, or maybe he just forgot his name? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, guys, I do have a trivia question for you today. And that trivia question is, which of these players has scored the most points in their career? Is it A, Chris Paul? Is it B, Stephen Curry? Is it C, DeMar DeRozan? Or is it D, LaMarcus Aldridge? So whoever answers this trivia question correctly first in the comment section gets a shout out in my next video. So that will be it for today's video, guys. You can follow me on Instagram. It's the Warch Report. Twitter is Warchtha. If you have any questions, trade scenarios, draft talks, anything you want, I'll talk to you about that on my social media as well. So that will be it for today's video, guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have yourselves a great day.